Superman 2025 is here, and this is my review. So let's get into it. I'll start off with a plot summary, then give my general thoughts on the movie. This is a spoiler-free review, so rest easy. I'm not going to get into anything too specific. I'll get my recommendation out as well, in terms of whether or not I think you should see this movie, who I think should see this movie. All that stuff is coming up. I'm also going to give a rating towards the end as well, in terms of what my overall thoughts are on the film. So if you're interested, stay locked in and let's get into the Superman review. So, plot summary. What happens in this movie? Again, this is going to be spoiler free, so I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. So, I'll lay the groundwork with the setting. So, you're dealing with planet Earth, it looks like, and we're in an alternate universe here where there's metahumans, which are superpowered individuals that have been showing up for at least the last 300 years, maybe longer. And in this setting, about 30 years ago, a certain metahuman by the name of, Superman crash lands. And then following that, about 27 years later, he announces himself, or 3 years ago, I should say, he announces himself as Superman. And he becomes the most powerful metahumans of all the other metahumans that are out there. Now, this is a very, very brief summary. None of what I actually mentioned is directly in the film. It's actually just a title card not a title card. There's just text information that shows up at the beginning of the movie, giving you all these details, just laying out the setting. And essentially what happens here is Superman ends up doing something that gets a lot of people upset with him. Now, Superman is just trying to save people's lives, but sometimes when you save the wrong people, you get in trouble. And that's what happens with Superman here, is that he intervenes in something that's going on, and it gets a lot of people upset with him. And eventually this sets off a chain of events that are orchestrated by the movie's villain, Luthor. And in those chain of events, this leads to Superman having to question his own identity. And that ultimately leads to him rallying together towards the end and figuring out who he is as a hero. And that's my plot summary there. Again, very brief, no spoilers, I think, given away in that. But what's really cool and interesting about the movie here is even though you're entering this new DC universe with a lot of existing characters that are already in play and all those different things, the movie does a really good job at still keeping this as an origin story in a way, like an origin movie, your first time seeing this Superman. And it tackles that by having the theme really focus on his identity. And that's really big because in general, that's what most first superhero outings are about, is that character's identity and them having to define, redefine, refine that identity. And that's what happens here in this movie. And it still fits as a first entry in a series because of that. Now, with that said, my general thoughts on this movie are that I enjoy it. I enjoyed this movie a lot. If I could see it again, I probably would. And I've seen it 3 times already. Reason why I don't know if I can see it again is, family, children, all that kind of stuff. And I don't necessarily know if I need to watch it a 3rd time to do my spoiler review, which is coming up, by the way. If you want to check that out, hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll get that spoiler review out. But overall, I do have to do some prep for other movies that are coming out like Fantastic Four. So I may not necessarily have time to watch this movie a 4th time, but best believe I definitely do want to watch it a 4th time. So I recommend that, I'll get into my recommendations later, but basically I enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed it. I really like the visuals. Visuals are nice. I really enjoyed the bright colors, like the bright blue, bright red, sunny day most of the time, barely any rain. I don't know. It's just, it gave a certain vibe of the universe that they're building here that I quite enjoyed. I really like different superhero universes that are well lived in, but also interesting and fun to hang out in. A good example is the Invincible TV series is probably my favorite TV show. But in there, what drew me to Invincible, because before I didn't even want to check out Invincible. I thought, another Superman, bad, evil story that I don't really care about. But once I saw the world itself and was able to experience the characters within that world, I thought, you know what? This is an interesting setting. I'd want to spend some more time in there. And I get that feel here with this as well, is that I enjoyed the world that they were in and just how wacky and wild it could sometimes get. I don't know. For me, it's really fun, really interesting. So I enjoyed the visuals. I enjoyed the vibes. And I definitely enjoyed the leads of this movie. So Rachel Brosnahan and David Corenswet and Nicholas Hoult are the three leads of the movie. They are playing Lois Lane, Clark Kent, and Lex Luthor, respectively. And I enjoyed them all. They didn't always have some of the best lines or writing in all of their scenes, but they were given some good material, particularly the conversations between Clark and Lois. Awesome. There's a couple of them in there that they don't come as often, but when they are there, it's really where the movie actually shines the most, is when those two are able to interact and when they're able to have conversations. So it's really golden in terms of the dynamic of these characters. Luther is played incredibly well by Nicholas Hoult. He's, again, supposed to be this cartoonish, ridiculous villain, and he totally is. But I love how in certain instances he plays it so straight and so well. Even his introduction at the beginning of the film, I really like that introduction to his character. I can get more into all this stuff in my spoiler reviews. So again, subscribe to learn more about that. But essentially, I really, really enjoyed the leads of this movie. And there's a lot of characters in the movie. I mean, a lot. But the leads, I think, still were able to stand out and leave a lasting impression. And I think the best scenes in the film and the best moments do tend to come from the leads, although Mr. Terrific is in the background trying to steal some of that shine as well. But either way, I really enjoyed the leads of this movie. Now, another thing as well is when it comes to whether or not you should watch this movie, because I enjoyed it, but hey, I'm an alien sometimes in terms of what it is that I enjoy. Whether or not you like this is what you gotta have to figure out. And when watching this movie in particular, speaking to people at the theaters, the few times I've watched it, I think that this movie does a really, really good job at hitting its target demographic. And what I mean by that is usually every movie, you have to focus somewhere or you hit no one, basically, right? You have to focus on something so that you can hit a target. And in this, they're really targeting that 18 to 35-year-old demographic of superhero fans or lovers. So people who might have grown up with some of the MCU and grown up with some superhero movies that might be willing to come and check out a DC movie this time around. And I think that's really the core target audience they are going for. And with that said, I think they knock it out of the park with that target demo. So if you're in that target demographic, this movie is probably going to be really enjoyable for you. You'll probably like it a lot. Unless, because again, there are some people who also don't like this movie. And in particular, it's understandable as to why. So I'd say usually older superhero fans that sort of grew up with, let's say, The Dark Knight or some of the older DC films in particular will appreciate the movie to an extent, but ultimately it's probably not going to be their cup of tea because some of the greatest stuff they would have watched and enjoyed would have been something that has a more serious, grounded adult tone. And there are also people who fit within that target demo that also like a more serious superhero film, which is fine, but that's not what you're going to get here. And if you're at least going into the movie expecting that it's going to be a little kooky, it's going to be a little goofy, it's going to be a little comical, it's going to be a comic book movie in that sense, right? Then that can sort of set your expectations going into watching it. And with that said, those people who are also looking for a movie that is going to be the movie, the superhero movie of the generation, right? If you're looking for that, knock it out of the park, Iron Man 1, like just the most amazing possible superhero movie you can find, I don't think it's here. I think this movie is really good. I don't think it's great. And I think some people are wanting this thing to be great, so much so that when they watch it and it's just really good, it can kind of let people down as well. So that's the other thing too there is when it comes to recommending the movie, typically if you're looking for this to be the superhero movie that gets you back into superhero movies or gets you going back into theater again, it might not exactly do that. This is really a movie focused on people who love the material, who love, say, the comics and who love the movies, right? That's really what they're focusing on here. So with that said, expectations are everything. And what I mean by that is if you're going into a movie, let's say Guardians of the Galaxy, most people had no idea what that was. Talking raccoon, talking tree, there's no way this movie is going to be any good at all. And essentially that is the same director who did this movie. People coming out of Guardians of the Galaxy were pleasantly surprised and quite enjoyed the movie. And hence, the movie did really, really well. Now, the movie is good, don't get me wrong, but expectations are key going into the movie. Superman's a huge property, big, big superhero character. Most people have no idea who this character is. Most people know exactly who this character is. And because of that, there's a certain cachet and a certain level of expectation that comes with that. And I would argue that those expectations may be misappropriated for this movie. And what I mean by that is this. When you look at certain superhero movies, like, say, Captain America, the First Avenger, that is Captain America's first movie. And going out of that movie, you can't necessarily say that that's a bad movie. It's pretty solid overall. It's not great by any means, but it's a pretty solid movie that is rewatchable in its essence, right? So it's a good foundation for that character. Now, if you go to Captain America's sequel, which is Captain America Winter Soldier, it's a phenomenal movie. It's a great film, you could say. And in that situation, you get that kind of a film. And then finally, Civil War is probably my favorite superhero movie, hands down. It was just a huge, fantastic film. But the key thing is you don't get Civil War without first having Captain America, the First Avenger, which of all the origin films in the MCU phase one, it's probably, at that time at least, most people's least favorite. People preferred Thor, people preferred Iron Man, some even Hulk, but overall, it was one of those movies that people were just kind of enjoying, but it wasn't necessarily the best thing ever. And I think this movie, although I would say it's probably better than that film, it's not nearly as good as something like Iron Man, as an example. And that kind of gives you a range of where to put this movie. It's somewhere in between, say, the first Captain America and the first Iron Man film. And that's kind of where you would place this movie here. The thing is that if you go into this movie with expectations that you got Superman, you got the Justice Gang, you got Luthor, and you're expecting huge spectacle of a film that is supposed to be as good as, say, Civil War, or as good as even the Captain America Winter Soldier, I think that's too much right out the gate for this movie. And I honestly don't think that the director or the team was going for that kind of a swing. They weren't swinging for a home run here. They're looking to hit a double instead. And I think they actually did that successfully in the movie. And if your expectations are set correctly, then hey, you'll actually enjoy this movie a lot more. There's some people I've seen who have watched this the first time around, and because they had such high expectations and it didn't meet those, they kind of didn't like it. But then when they watched the film again a second time, they actually enjoyed it more. My favorite viewing of the film actually was my second viewing. I really enjoyed that. And then once I got into my third one, it sort of dropped a little bit. I haven't seen it a fourth time yet, but who knows? I may or may not watch it depending on what I need for that spoiler review. Anyway, now let's get to my rating, how I actually rate this film. Essentially, my overall rating for the film I'll give towards the end. But usually when I grade a movie, I tend to grade it on 3 different scales. So I look at whether or not it actually fits within its genre and it executes within its genre alone, right? So I want to focus on the genre part of things. I also look at things that are related to creativity. So how well does it try different things that are outside of its genre? And usually a film that is really creative can become what I like to say is a genre defining film, which is a movie that basically changes how other movies are made in that genre. Good example of that is something like The Dark Knight, where it really did something special with how it was handling the crime thriller aspect of things and the superhero aspect of things and blending those together. And I really think that that movie transformed the way future superhero movies were made. Guardians of the Galaxy is another one where the humor in that film in particular, better or worse, defined how a lot of superhero movies going forward were executing on their humor. So I try to take a look at that creativity angle and aspect of things and what that looks like. And then lastly, for my rating, I also like to look at whether or not the movie is something you can take your grandma to. Is it a movie that is a genre-breaking movie? A movie that you don't have to care about superhero movies, you have to care about horror, whatever the genre is. Does this thing hit so hard that it doesn't matter who watches it? And those are 3 things I'm kind of rate it by. So the first one, genre. Does this fit within its genre? Absolutely yes. I would say it's probably a 9 out of 10 in terms of how good this is as a superhero movie. And I really mean it. It's one of the best superhero specific films I've seen. And what I mean by that is it's completely unashamed of all the superhero quirks that you can put in a movie. Like, I don't know what, like, they just don't hold back. I mean, there's pocket universes, there's all this crazy science, all this crazy stuff that's in the movie, and they just walk around and act like it's nothing. It's just part of the film. It's really not shy about being a superhero movie. Very, very much so. And I really appreciate that about the movie. But ultimately, it hits a lot of the beats that you get from a superhero movie. In particular, this is a superhero action comedy, is probably how I would describe it in terms of genre. The action is definitely enjoyable. The comedy hit or miss in certain points, but there are genuine moments where I laughed more genuinely than I've laughed in any other film. Like there's one joke in there that talks about being of the cloth. And for me, I don't know, it just hit really hard because it's a funny joke. You'll see it when you watch it. But ultimately, for me at least, the comedy definitely hit. Most of the jokes I probably didn't laugh at, but the ones that I did laugh at were genuine, deep, like you're just laughing from your gut. Like, oh, that's clever. That's hilarious. So to me, the comedy worked. The action worked. I definitely enjoyed how Superman was flying around fighting. There's a couple scenes with other characters that are also really cool. It's enjoyable action. There's certain action scenes you just want to see over and over again. So the action worked very, very well. And then lastly, yeah, for me, all that stuff worked. When it comes to creativity and sort of how this movie tries to, switch up the genre a little bit and make things a little bit different than they are in the superhero genre, it kind of does it a little bit. There are certain things that are spoilery that I can't talk about right now that are definitely important in my spoiler review that I'm going to talk about that kind of lead into that. But ultimately, I think that when it comes to the creativity, this is probably not as high of a rating as how they are with the genre. So I'd probably say like a 7.5 out of 10 when it comes to the creativity aspect of things, because I don't really think that they push the envelope enough to where you can say going forward, all superhero movies are going to be like Superman. I don't think so. Hey, I could be wrong. 2 years from now, maybe all comic book movies are this comical essentially and this wild and out there. But personally, I think that they definitely did play it safe in a lot of areas. And they're, again, just trying to hit a double. They weren't swinging for a home run here. I could really tell that's the case. And for that, I can't give it too much of a rating when it comes to the creativity. Lastly, whether or not you can take your grandma to watch this movie or your grandpa, whoever, to be honest, I don't think you would in most cases. This movie is very specific to its genre, very much so. To the point where I was watching it with my brother and he said that for someone who likes superhero movies, he'd recommend them watching it. But for someone who doesn't like superhero movies, he just says to stay out of it and to not watch it at all, which I honestly would agree with in a lot of areas, in that the movie doesn't really try to appeal to the normal audience as much as they try to appeal to the comic book movie goer. And that's not a bad thing, but you got to rate it a certain way, right? There's certain movies that do such a good job that even if it's a comic book movie, you can still recommend others to go watch it. A good example is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That movie is executed so phenomenally well that even someone who doesn't like superhero characters, who doesn't care for superheroes at all, can find themselves thoroughly enjoying that movie. And that's just the way that movie is set up. And something like Captain America: Civil War, its sequel, is kind of the complete opposite, where you kind of have had to see a multiple MCU movies together to really get the most out of that movie. So this is just one of those movies where they really wanted to focus on that superhero character of Superman and that superhero world and making sure that that works. So with that said, when I total all those things together, I kind of get a rating of 7.5. But I'm a believer in that when you're rating something, 7 is a cop out. So with that said, I would probably move this up to an 8 out of 10 overall as a movie, which I think makes sense. It, matches up with some of the other ratings that are out there when it comes to, say, the Rotten Tomatoes or whichever. But to me, that's really where this movie sits, as like an 8 out of 10. A really good movie, not a great movie, but definitely worth watching and checking out. So if, you have some time this weekend, next weekend to check it out, feel free to watch. I definitely think it is worth your time. And lastly, I want to kind of get into one more thing, which is the lessons that are within the film. I do think that there's no such thing as entertainment, in that anything that we're watching, we are watching it to pick something up from it. And usually that thing we can take with us and do more things with. In particular, with this movie, after watching it, I found myself doing things a bit differently than I normally would. In that, I'll give a quick example. I was on my way home taking a lift, and in the lift, I started talking to the driver, and I started talking to him about the things that he enjoyed, which he was into cars. He started talking about his car and sort of the laws and the rules going on within our area when it comes to purchasing vehicles. Anyways, we got into this whole topic that I genuinely don't care about, didn't want to talk about. But having just been fresh off of watching this movie and sort of seeing some of the messages that are being hammered home within the film, it almost compelled me in a way to be more personable to that driver. Other examples as well is at home with my wife. I've done a lot of things that were, I guess, a bit kinder, essentially, like things that, not that, I'm terrible most of the time, but, a lot of the times you kind of just go through your day and things are difficult and you kind of forget how you're supposed to be towards those that are around you. And I think one of the good reminders I got from watching the movie is the importance of having an amazing attitude and demeanor around those that are around you. And also just making sure that you're kind, or as kind as possible, to those around you. And this actually affected how I was behaving at home, to the point where my wife started remarking at what I was doing. And I think that that's an element of this film that isn't necessarily talked about as much, but I think is important, in that there are elements of this movie that will inspire you to be more. There are elements of this film that will cause you to be a better version of yourself. There are parts of this film that will really sort of tug at that optimist within you and make you actually think that it's worth being kind, even when you're not getting anything out of being kind. And I think that that right there is something that's very special, very unique, and very enjoyable about this film. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to watch it more, is because there was a genuine effect that it had on me in terms of how I lived my day to day. And to me, when I look at that, it tells me that this movie is much more than just a simple movie to waste your time in. I think that there's something there that's worthwhile and that's enriching. And for those reasons, I recommend Superman 2025. I'm your man, Lex. This is another review. I will have some more videos coming out specifically on this movie. I got the spoiler one coming out and another little video I'm working on as well. So feel free to hit that like button, subscribe, leave some comments below. Please keep it spoiler free for those who haven't seen it. And yeah, let me know your spoiler free thoughts on what you thought of the movie as well. How did it impact you? Did you do something differently when you got home? Did you do something differently around others? I'm really curious to see if, I'm the outlier here, or if that happened to a lot of others who watched the film as well. With that said, I'm your man, Lex. This was a review, and I am out. Peace.